Welcome to AEC Podcast, sponsored by Applied Software. I'm your host, Christopher Riddell, and I have the pleasure of having Michael LeFevre join me today to talk about his book, Managing Design. Now, you look below, there's going to be a link so you can get access to his book. Anything you want to say about it before we get started, Michael?
Well, I'm thrilled for you all having me here today. It's good to be had. I'm looking for any chances to shamelessly promote this book.
Nah, shamelessly. So where can we find this?
So you can find it on Amazon.com or on Wiley.com.
Cool, fantastic. So, Michael, you're, correct me if I'm wrong, you're an architect by trade, correct?
Yes.
And then sort of a pioneer by choice. What made you switch from architecture to construction when you did?
Well, back at the age of 14, I was working in an architect's office.
Okay.
And that was, just to put this in perspective, that was before Woodstock. It was in 1968.
Okay.
So I practiced in architecture for 30 years through a variety of small, medium, large firms here in Atlanta with Here International, ending up as a principal in Lord X Sargent, really good firms.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing the kind of endless cycles of being over budget and a lack of profitability, I just decided I couldn't take it anymore. And I decided to just jump off the building and reinvent myself. So after having worked on a couple of projects with Holder Construction, I pitched the idea of creating this role of somebody who connects designers and builders and owners to make us work better together as teams in the quest for example, an architect will do an incredible job doing a design of a project and reduce the budget, but if they're being compensated on a percentage of construction costs, they'll cost themselves money to do that.
Yep.
So to get in a situation where we have more leverage, more value, and it kind of can harness the power of better teams, more value, more intelligence, and I decided to give that a shot. And amazingly enough, that was 22 years ago at Holder Construction, and I've recently retired from there to get this book on the street, and have started a new career now with a company called Design Intelligence, the country's leading design think tank.
So were there any specific hardships you really faced when you switched or made the switch to construction?
Oh, yeah. I guess the first thing I'll say for anybody considering this, and I hope people might consider this, because I think there's huge value in having the courage to getting outside your comfort zone.
Yep.
Crossing over the line.
It makes you stronger as an individual.
Absolutely. And your learning curve will never be as great. But what you have to be mindful of is, hey, you better be pretty confident to get outside of your own comfort zone. You got to have some skills. Number two, you're probably going to get rid of a lot of political capital. I certainly did. Went from being a senior guy in a design firm to being the lone, one of my kind, different fish in a very different pond, a stranger in a strange land, the guy who was there to disrupt things and change things within a very successful company. So you got to be prepared for that. But if you do that within a company that has a good culture and you're all working for the same end, then for me, it's been incredibly rewarding.
Did you find being that disruptor was sort of a lonely position?
At times, yeah, very much. But that if you're with a company with a common mission, you're going to build some allies, and they're going to have that same mission to do that. So, if you want to be a crusader and a change agent, you're always going to face that. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is you have to find your own balance between the amount of time you spend doing what you're good at and doing what you love doing, and the amount of time you're willing to crusade, fight, generate conflict. Eventually, you have to
let go of what you're good at and focus more on the change.
To a certain extent. But I will challenge that by saying that's one of the reasons I made my move, because I realized I was better at making rules and breaking rules and following rules. So I allied myself with a team who was very good at getting from A to B, managing the business, managing the risk. So it gave me the perfect opportunity to do what I was good at. Design, creative things, collaborative things, and these cross-industry connecting things. And I never set out to do that decades ago. It's just
where you found yourself.
Yeah, it's just what happened.
So then what made you write this?
Well, I just couldn't take it anymore.
You had to share the gospel.
Exactly. No, the truth is, when you get to a stage in life and you've been at it for 4, 5, 6 decades, you start seeing your perspective and your trajectory, get the asymptote starts to come, and you say, I think I might be on the downhill slide of my career. And you start thinking about, what am I going to give back? What am I going to leave behind? Am I going to leave the campsite better than I found it? And, all those kinds of legacy kind of thoughts is the word for it. Mm-hmm. You say, I've done a lot of stuff. Some people have told me some of it's been okay. I think it's time to kind of capture this and share this. And that, coupled with the fact that over the decades, I really did become a student of the game and capturing, writing, borrowing, largely through the power of computers and technology to be able to grab information, share, reuse, exchange. So writing was not a new thing to me, okay, but it just kind of got to be the right time and place. And I was lucky enough to have company support also, who said, you still have to get your job done, but we will support your doing this. And so it was kind of a perfect storm to make it happen.
And so these are sort of made up of interviews, correct? There's a lot of interviews that you went on. One is, you said you made the switch from architecture to construction, and one had to do with just the budgets and the schedules and everything. So why do you think architects are so bad at being able to keep up with the schedule and the budgeting? Well, did you figure that out when you wrote this?
That's the unanswerable question. The original title of this book was Managing Design ? And Other Oxymorons. And the publisher Wiley said, you have to get rid of the question mark. That's shows uncertainty and weakness. And number 2, no search engine optimization is searching for the word oxymoron. Yeah. So you got to be confident and short. But Chris, what I realized early on is, and at first this was about me and my journey, but I realized very early on in trying to get to your question, is it was not about me, mm-hmm. It was about we. And I had to include all these other voices. When that light bulb finally turned on, I said, I've got to include the voices of designers, contractors, owners, trade contractors, students, teachers, technologists, strategists, academics, owners, everybody. And it also struck me like a 2x4 on the side of the head that I had to stop talking to my old buddies who were 60-year-old white guys. And so I broadened the demographic. I became more diverse. Yep. And so the conversations got richer and better as I did that. So that was kind of the first breakthrough.
Which is so critical because for whatever reason, this industry seems you can silo yourself very quickly.
Oh, yeah. And there's, on one hand, there's a need for that as it gets more vast and more complex. You have to say, I can't be good at everything. Yep. And one of the things I learned is, we need people that are siloed and very good at special things. But because of this complexity, we now need people who are connectors and translators. Mm-hmm. And this role of design management, I certainly hope that architects and designers will get better at doing it themselves. Yeah. I hope that contractors will get better at it. I hope that owners will get better at it. And maybe there are these specialists within any of those entities whose job it is just to translate, connect, and get at what is the core and probably still unanswerable question, which you asked a minute ago, which is why can't we do this? And what I think I knew this before I started, but what I really wanted to do is help other people understand this. And the reason that designers are not good at doing these things is because it's their job not to.
True.
They go to school. They're genetically
to be creative,
selected to be creative, to get out of the box. Yep. If they were good at getting from A to B in a hurry, they would have been managers. They would have been accountants. They would have been contractors. Mm-hmm. Do I want contractors designing the buildings? Absolutely not. But those very strengths that contractors have on getting from A to B quickly, efficiently, and doing what they're told is precisely what makes them great teammates for the design cadre who are, there is no right answer. We can always generate more options. We can always go on. So these and one of the things I try to share in doing the book is that you cannot just swoop in and apply traditional management principles to the design process. It does not work because there is no one answer. So it's this whole thing about sharing and transferring understanding. The more that owners and contractors can understand how design process works, the fact that we're supposed to go in circles, we're supposed to go down blind alleys, come back to where we started from, and knowing that, they can support that. So this book is largely about empathy. It's about harnessing the power of others.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. So, there's a lot of our delivery methods that sort of go against the idea of collaboration. So say a design, bid, build type of delivery method. But then there's these others that we often practice. We have design, build, and we have IPD that comes up all the time and no one really seems to really grasp it. I think there's reasons for that. But when you were doing these interviews, did you have any stories or talk to any owners that really were benefiting from those fully collaborative delivery or project delivery methods?
Yeah, there are a few leaders who are doing that contractually, and they're seeing the benefits amazingly. In my more than 50-year career, I had never had the chance in any situation to work with a contractual shared incentive contract. Call it IPD, call it what you will.
Well, and part of the problem is always going to, up till now, is the insurance part, the liability. And so I think that's always what's kind of preventing everyone. So you have these like IPD light things where there's some shared incentives, but not the insurance.
We had, in my 2 decades at Holder, we always had an interesting perspective, and it was applied mainly to BIM, but I think it would apply to these new forms of contracts. We said, you could get if you were an insurance person or a lawyer, you could get so worked up and afraid of the new, and what does this mean for ownership and insurance and liability, that you would be unable to function or do anything. So we took a very different attitude. We said, what have we got to lose? The way we're doing it is not wonderful now, and is fraught with all kinds of fragmented issues and inconsistencies. So we would try, let's share a BIM model and not worry about who owns it. Let's see how it works. Let's trust each other. And we had great success by doing things and see what happened, and then letting the insurance and the lawyers follow behind. Now, if I'd gone to law school, maybe I'd have a different opinion, but I'm a design guy and a collaboration guy. So
and a disruptor.
And a disruptor, yeah.
So I've sort of looked through this, and I feel like collaboration is one of the sort of the main themes of the book. And so I'm curious, as your opinion, as you've gone through this and just in your own experience, do you think we're better at collaborating now where the technology is, or has the technology allowed us to be worse at collaborating? And what I mean by that is we can now work remotely. I can work in a different office. I don't have to be next to you anymore. Do you find that technology is actually a hindrance or a help when it comes to collaborating?
I think that's one of those great yin-yang questions, because without technology, I can't get on a webinar with you with one click of the button. I was listening to Terry Gross from NPR, a great interviewer yesterday, and she shared that almost all of her interviews are done by phone. So were mine in this book. I got on a Skype meeting, I clicked on one button, recorded the whole thing, and as she talked about, the advantage is you're not confronting people face-to-face with some of these tough questions or personal questions. So technology made that easy, painless, one click, and then I would transcribe the interview. Technology lets us share information, do all these wonderful things, link people globally because that's how we're practicing, because we need so many experts.
Yep. But,
who wouldn't want to be face-to-face? You gave me the choice today. I wanted to be here in person with you.
Makes it more comfortable.
So these abilities, my wife and I, she was upstairs working in her office, and I was in the basement, and she's, we're there in the house, and she's texting me, can I go get something at the store, So you get these kind of issues, and you say, this is nuts.
Yep.
So you just got to be mindful of it, and you got to be I have some efficiency in me, some of those engineering nerd aspects, and so I'd be setting up a meeting, and I'd be shooting out a bunch of emails to people about all the things we have to do. And our great relationship managers would come and say, no, we got to go. Let's get in the car. Let's get on a plane. Let's go face to face. I said, you're absolutely right. we cannot lose hold of that. So I think it's
both.
It's an art, it's a science.
Yeah, because I do think firms have to actively make sure that their team members are engaged and participating. Because although technology is great for collaboration, it also can alienate you very quickly. So, as you've talked to these different professionals, collaboration is probably the most critical part of it all. How can we be better at collaborating in an industry that's still very contentious? I mean, it's still sort of an architect versus contractor, and normally it's contractor has the owner's ear, and so it's still a very contentious industry most of the time. How are you seeing us getting better at it, or what do you think we need to do to get better at collaborating?
Everybody heard this in school, probably got forced to do one class in collaboration or deal with something with sociology, and many of them were probably very uncomfortable and hated it because, I used to jokingly say I got in this business, I'll make it personal, because we didn't have to deal with crisis. We weren't in the emergency room, we weren't in a lawsuit in a courtroom. We just got to draw lines and deal with inanimate objects and make shapes and forms and build them. And that was true. That was why I got in it. But surprise, there's human beings involved. So we have emotions and conflicts and all those same things. So I lost my train of thought where I was going with all that. Oh, so if I had to say, in going through this book and in my career, two things that I've preached, and sometimes I still feel like a voice in the wilderness. But if I had to say two things that would improve that situation, I'll add a third at the end. And the third, I don't want to dwell on it. It goes back to your issue of contracts and incentives. Mm-hmm. Hardly anybody I know in this business is in it because they love contracts. But when the contract sets us up to be adversaries, then we have no choice.
Yep.
I did an interview with one of our superintendents, and that's the first thing he mentioned. It stunned me. He said, when we're on the hook for the schedule as a contractor, and then the owner or the architect comes and says, hey, we'd really like to make this change, we have to, by contract, say, happy to help you do that, but here's what it means to the schedule. Mm-hmm. Because that's the rules of the game that were set up. Yep. Now, if this were a three-way shared incentive project, we could look at each other and say, can we make this happen? What does it mean? What do we adjust here to hold the schedule? And so on and so. Everybody would agree contracts are the most influential thing. It sets up the liability, the money, the motivation, all that.
And that's kind of what leads it to a contentious industry still.
Yeah, but I set that aside because I don't wake up in the morning to worry about contracts. So what I really want to talk about is two things: making the time to have a planning phase at the beginning of the project, and then an important part of that is making the time, forcing the time, being intelligent about it to get to know our teammates.
Yep.
Because what do we do now? We do the whole project. It starts, we're already behind the eight ball. We have to start ordering materials, get the drawings done, get out in the field and get going because the owner waited too long or it's too late. We didn't have any time to plan. We start, I never took the time to get to know you. I don't know who you are, where you're from, what you like, what you dislike, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. And we get all the way through the project. At the end of the project, we have a party to celebrate that we somehow survived it.
Topping out party.
And we have a topping out party or a building opening dedication party, and we have beer and wine and drinks, and we finally get to know one another. And I find out that, what is it? You and I went to the same school, or we both played the drums. Why didn't we do that when we started the project?
Very true.
We would have a much different relationship. So taking the time, making the time to do that is huge. And it sort of addresses the forcing yourself to have a planning phase, not just on the interpersonal side, but to set up, going to the technical side, to set up protocols for how we're going to exchange information. Do you have this software? Do we have it? What infrastructure do we have? Do you have training on it? And in the early days of building modeling, we had to bootstrap lots of partners. Maybe we had identified them already as being a potential dance partner, but the project started, and we'd go on the road and preach about these success stories, how we bootstrap these people. Here, try this software. We'll teach you how to use it. And by the end of the project, we had transformed the organization of a trade contractor or an owner a partner. So if you're not intentional about collaborating and getting to know your people, and then setting up a plan in which you plan out your time, you plan out your budget, your program. I'm getting into preaching about the book here, and that's how it all started. There were 5 tangible things that I asserted that you could measure if you wanted to manage design. And in the early days, I called them the project controls. And it was the program, the budget, the scope, the schedule, and the documents. So, okay, as a designer, I know that design is amorphous and it's jello, and sometimes you miss schedule dates and you backtrack. But if you set those things down in stone, they're tangible. You can see them. You can measure them. You have it. And now, if one changes, if the owner changes the scope by adding 3 floors to the building, that's probably going to have an influence on those other things. And this delicate balance needs to be adjusted. And then, as I got into the book, this whole thing kind of morphed. And what I realized is, okay, those are just the hard, tangible aspects.
Yep.
But if we don't have that foundation of trust, collaboration, the kind of interpersonal dynamics, and all those things, then none of them are worth what they're written on, because you don't trust me. You don't believe it. I'm the contractor. I've been yelling at you as the designer that this is the budget. And if you don't believe me, if you don't trust me, we've wasted our time. Yeah. Or if I don't trust you, let's say I do the budget. If you trust me and we've established that relationship, you know that I believe Mike. I know he's done his homework. And he says this thing costs X dollars a square foot. It does. If you don't trust me, you're going to spend weeks analyzing my budget, challenging it, testing it. Now you're not getting your work done. You're redoing my work. So what is the value of having taken the time to plan, build trust? Would you rather spend it up front when you're early on that influence curve where you have a huge impact? Or would you rather say, I'm too busy to plan, I'm too busy to take the time to get to know my people, and just rush into it headlong, and then get to the place where I would venture to say 99% of all projects get where they are, in fact, once again, over budget. And now you've got to spend all that time undoing it.
Well, it all goes to that saying, something along the lines of failing to plan is planning to fail. When you were talking about getting to know your team, it brought me up, or reminded me of something in your book, and I don't know the exact title, but you had a chapter where you talk about basically the engineer mindset, and the fact that they're always kind of last to the table. Do you see, or as you've gone through this, do you see firms that are actually getting better about incorporating them at the right time? Or, where do you see we need to go so that engineer doesn't feel like they've been left out, that they're, behind the 8 ball all the time?
I do see firms getting better as the world of design and construction gets more complex. When we did buildings, we knew in school that if you plant a tree on the south side, it's going to shade the building and you're good. Now you need to have energy analysis software, run the numbers, show it to the client, comply with the energy code, make sure it meets budget. You probably want to have that visual so everybody can see it, not just data after data. So we got many more technicians and gurus on our team. So anybody who doesn't bring them on early is really the dummy in the process. I learned so much in having enough sense to involve the engineers. I chose 2 engineers in this book who were 2 of the smartest people that I know. They both happen to be based here in Atlanta. Well, one has actually moved up to New York in the Northeast, but the structural engineer was a guy named Kurt Swenson, has a PhD, and his accounting to me of how he has to read his audience with situational awareness. Does this client, and he used the analogy of a waiter. You come into my restaurant, and you're a group of businessmen, you just want to eat your dinner, do your business, and be out of here in 20 minutes. The next group comes in, they're on a retreat, they want to have drinks for 2 or 3 hours, party, tell jokes. He's got to read his client because he's not in the lead. So he's got to lead from behind, follow, and if he sees that somebody's not leading, then he has to have the courage of speaking up and say, wait a minute, what's our plan here? We're going down this road and nobody seems to be in charge. So he's got to have the courage to do that. And the other fellow is Dan Nall, again, a fellow in the American Institute of Architects, ASHRAE, engineering lead, sustainability. This guy could design the most hybrid, unique solution for anything on the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. But having practiced as a consulting engineer, he shared that, you know, for his survival as an engineer, not being necessarily in the lead, even if he was at the table early, he said, if somebody just wants me to do a spec office building and put an air handler in the mechanical room and move on, then frankly, I could give a bleep what the global vision for the project is, you know, because that's the rules of the game that they've set up, and he has to follow that. So fascinating for me to learn more about how the world looks from their perspective.
Was there any, so you interviewed a lot of people, was there any one interview that sort of stood out as you know, really insightful, something that you really took away from wow, I didn't know that? Or your favorite interview that maybe you...
Yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite, but one that really stood out was one with Dave Gilmore, my new colleague at Design Intelligence. He had worked in the software, technology, banking, mergers and acquisitions field. Mm-hmm. He described to me how when they were going to do a $100 million software merger between two banks, they brought all the players together, something like 100 people in the room. And they got to know one another for a month before they ever started the work. And I said, wait a minute, what did you just say? He said, oh, yeah. And I said, you know, in my world, in the world of design or construction, the principals would be saying, you need to get billable hours. You need to start doing something productive. We can't do this. And I told him, I used to preach and try to get people to come into the room for an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, half a day to have a get-to-know-you meeting. And this guy did it for a month. And I said, we did lots of $100 million projects. And it was beyond anybody's wildest imagination to spend a month in the upfront getting-to-know-you phase before you work. And what did they do in that phase? Everything I talked about earlier. Set up the protocols, developed common goals, got to know one another, worked out all the technology. And if they had some stubborn old, whoever it was, trade contractor says, listen, I don't work that way. He said, you know what we did? We exited them.
I said, part of the team.
You exited them? I said, yep. We said, you're not going to work out here. We gave you 2 or 3 chances, and you're not getting what we're saying here. We're a team.
Yeah.
We're truly a team. So, bye-bye. I loved it. So, I'm not sure if I'll ever be successful at getting somebody to take a month to do that, but that's my dream world.
I have a couple more questions. One, you know, it's not super related to even what we've talked about. I'm just curious if it's something you've come across. And you may have during these interviews. I pay attention, or I like to pay attention a lot to the multi-generational workforce. Maybe it's because I'm a millennial and I get picked on a lot, so I find it fun to see. So perhaps during these interviews or just in general, I feel like there's a huge impact. The multi-generational workforce, it impacts the firm culture, which also can impact the collaboration of it. As you've interviewed these people and you've talked to these different firms and you've worked elsewhere, are you seeing where people are actually acknowledging that?
I would say most of the big design firms, and I'm most familiar with them, quite a number of them are going through a design process, re-engineering or firm reinvention. And that is, on one hand, to find a new process, but I think on the other hand, it's to accommodate the different generational work styles. As the baby boomer leadership generation, the folks that are my age and older are experiencing what our team at Design Intelligence says is going to be a mass exodus in the industry when that leadership goes. And the way the old timers say, well, you know, Jason's a good guy. He really knows how to use that BIM software, but he doesn't know how to put a building together. Yep, is the old expression. No, so I would come back from conferences, and at first I stole this really good idea. I said, you know, I found this thing, and it's called reverse mentoring. So you young person needs to sit with the old person who knows how to detail and design and put a building together, and you can teach them more about the software.
And they can teach you how to practice.
Well, that was the comeback. That's exactly the perfect line. You teed me up. They said, Mike, that's a great idea, this reverse mentoring thing, but would it be okay if we learned something too? Yeah. And so we realized, it's got to be a 360 thing, and it's peer-to-peer, and it's circular, and it's all directions, and it's not just necessarily two people. It's, technology enabled and humans and socially enabled. It's got to be in new ways. But, there are a couple people in the book who've talked about, and, I think people have been saying this for generations since the caveman, expressions like, these kids today just don't get it. Well, the fact is technology has changed, and it's changed the people. So now that when I was giving birth to my BIM department of 20-some people, I'd read the management books that talked about management by walking around. So I'd get up and go stand there next to them and, how you doing? What are you working on? Lean over their shoulder. And, shockingly, they responded back and said, no, actually, I'd rather have you send me an email or text me because I'm deep in some code here and I don't want to be disrupted.
So everyone has their headphones in.
I'll try to respect that. Yeah. And, so I tried to learn but you find the balance. So I think people are working on all those things, more remote work. The other complaint that follows right behind these kids today is they don't have the values. What do you mean you're going home at 5 o'clock because you have to go to your child's soccer game? I didn't get to do that when I was in my 20s. Where are your values? You should be a stupid idiot and work till 8 o'clock like I did. And so we said, that gives me great hope. That means this generation is already smarter than we are. They're going to find a way to balance,
figure it out,
things, and use tools and use each other in some new. I had a great interview with Errol Wolford in here who talks about gamification. And the way it allows current generations to collaborate and share in ways that we never could because we couldn't work on central data. We couldn't swap files that way. So that's how technology is changing mindset and behavior.
I do think, and this is not just the architect or the AEC industry. I think as we move forward, there's going to be a large gap, just like you sort of alluded to, because there are a lot of the baby boomers, a lot of the millennials, but there's a lot of those Gen Xers, that middle gap, those people that left the industry during the Great Recession that never came back.
Yes.
And so I think it's going to be critical for firm survival to be able to pass all your information on down to me, because there's that sort of middle gap that quite frankly doesn't exist anymore. So I have, one more question, and it's more of, I don't know if it's in your book, but it's a forecast. And I'm curious to see, where do you think, as a whole, the industry, where do you think we will be when it comes to collaborating and managing design, say in 10 years or 2030, 2050? I mean, do you think can you see there's going to be another version of you with this same book trying to say, guys, we need to be doing this, or do you actually see us making progress forward? And I know that's a loaded question. I'm just curious.
Well, I think one of the reasons I wrote the book is that it's been hundreds of years in the making, and we're still laying bricks one at a time, and we still have the sort of our cultural built-in biases between designers and contractors. Is it getting better? Yes, absolutely, already, and I think it will be. I just read a great paper, and it reminded me. And this is the standard slide in any BIM conference, the flat line of AEC industry productivity over the last 100 years compared to all industries, all others, including farming and pig farmers and straw bay choppers and straw bales of hay. Anyway, we're the last industry to get it, to capitalize ourselves, to use technology to change. And I think it is happening. We were chatting earlier about prefabrication, modularization, industrialization that has come to the airline industry 30 years ago, come to the automobile industry, come to all other industries except largely for design and construction. So, and I think, so the technology and all that stuff and the capitalization is going to help us. And then this very same article was talking about how increased collaboration is going to contribute 20% of the change and design process. So there's 2 or 3 of these things on the soft side of the equation that are anticipated by the gurus to be required to make this happen. So yeah, I see. I think that's my hope. Is that we're happier, we're more collaborative. That my poor colleagues in the design profession who love what we do so much, but have just gotten themselves into a position of commodification, can make the kind of incomes that they deserve and can learn how to articulate that to owners.
Yep.
And get, this is one of my great eye-opening things working in a construction company. Everything that's related to the cost of the work gets passed on to the owner as cost of the work. Mm-hmm. And rightly so, it's their building. So, if the marketplace dictates that a project manager or a superintendent should have a rental car as part of their compensation package, that's what the construction industry has as a benchmark, and all owners will say, okay, fine, if that's what it takes.
Yep.
I can't imagine any design firm having the skill set to pitch successfully the idea of their principal. His car should be paid for as cost of the project.
We give our work away for free.
Yeah. So we got to get better at selling, defending our value, restoring the confidence as the design community. And we can learn from our construction colleagues who are good at that, or get more people within the design community who are better value proposers, better sellers, better communicators, and be mindful of that. This is one of the, we never had this, no one ever used this word in school, the notion that the act of design is a risk-inducing proposition. Mm-hmm. Things are status quo right now, and I come in as a designer and I want to do a new building. I want to change the shape. I want to change the order of things. Every decision I make induces risk. We're never taught that. And the ability to better manage that risk and make those decisions with pros and cons or economic aspects or sustainability and life cycle aspects. Contractors are incredibly good at it. Should we build it? Should we excavate this trench and lay the soil back, or should we shore it? Evaluate the options, price it, do it, manage it. Design communities I just thought that was cool. I just thought that was beautiful. But, we got to be able to phrase that in a better way and communicate that.
Well, Michael, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Tell everyone, where can they get this one more time? Where you go? You can find this new book on Amazon.com or on Wiley.com. And if you do it, I'd love it if you'd put a review on there or share your feedback with me via email. Hopefully there'll be a link on the podcast. There should be one somewhere down there. So we can continue the conversation. Or depending on where I am in the blog, maybe up there. I don't know. But I thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it, Michael. Thank you so much. Your values. You should be a stupid idiot and work till 8 o'clock like I did. And so we said, that gives me great hope. That means this generation is already smarter than we are. They're going to find a way to balance, figure it out, things and use tools and use each other in some new, I had a great interview with Errol Wolford in here who talks about gamification and the way it allows current generations to collaborate and share in ways that we never could, because we couldn't work on central data. We couldn't swap files that way. So that's how technology is changing mindset and behavior. I do think, and this is not just the architect or the AEC industry. I think as we move forward, there's going to be a large gap, just like you sort of alluded to, because there are a lot of the baby boomers, there's a lot of the millennials, but there's a lot of those Gen Xers, that middle gap, those people that left the industry during the Great Recession that never came back. Yes. And so I think it's going to be critical for firm survival to be able to pass all your information on down to me, because there's that sort of middle gap that quite frankly doesn't exist anymore. So I have, one more question, and it's more of, I don't know if it's in your book, but it's a forecast. And I'm curious to see, where do you think as a whole, the industry, where do you think we will be when it comes to collaborating and managing design, say in 10 years or 2030, 2050? I mean, do you think can you see there's going to be another version of you with this same book trying to say, guys, we need to be doing this, or do you actually see us making progress forward? And I know that's a loaded question. I'm just curious.
Well, I think one of the reasons I wrote the book is that it's been hundreds of years in the making, and we're still laying bricks one at a time, and we still have the sort of our cultural built-in biases between designers and contractors. Is it getting better? Yes, absolutely, already, and I think it will be. I just read a great paper, and it reminded me. And this is the standard slide in any BIM conference, the flat line of AEC industry productivity over the last 100 years compared to all industries, all others, including farming and pig farmers and straw bay choppers and straw bales of hay. Anyway, we're the last industry to get it, to capitalize ourselves, to use technology to change. And I think it is happening. We were chatting earlier about prefabrication, modularization, industrialization that has come to the airline industry 30 years ago, come to the automobile industry, come to all other industries except largely for design and construction. So, and I think, so the technology and all that stuff and the capitalization is going to help us. And then this very same article was talking about how increased collaboration is going to contribute 20% of the change and design process. So there's 2 or 3 of these things on the soft side of the equation that are anticipated by the gurus to be required to make this happen. So yeah, I see. I think that's my hope. Is that we're happier, we're more collaborative. That my poor colleagues in the design profession who love what we do so much, but have just gotten themselves into a position of commodification, can make the kind of incomes that they deserve and can learn how to articulate that to owners.
Yep.
And get, this is one of my great eye-opening things working in a construction company. Everything that's related to the cost of the work gets passed on to the owner as cost of the work. And rightly so, it's their building. So, if the marketplace dictates that a project manager or a superintendent should have a rental car as part of their compensation package, that's what the construction industry has as a benchmark. And all owners will say, okay, fine, if that's what it takes.
Yep.
I can't imagine any design firm having the skill set to pitch successfully the idea of their principal. His car should be paid for as cost of the project.
We give our work away for free.
Yeah. So we got to get better at selling, defending our value, restoring the confidence as the design community. And we can learn from our construction colleagues who are good at that, or get more people within the design community who are better value proposers, better sellers, better communicators, and be mindful of that. This is one of the we never had this, no one ever used this word in school, the notion that the act of design is a risk-inducing proposition. Things are status quo right now, and I come in as a designer and I want to do a new building. I want to change the shape. I want to change the order of things. Every decision I make induces risk. We're never taught that. And the ability to better manage that risk and make those decisions with pros and cons or economic aspects or sustainability and life cycle aspects. Contractors are incredibly good at it. Should we build it? Should we excavate this trench and lay the soil back, or should we shore it? Evaluate the options, price it, do it, manage it. Design community just, I just thought that was cool. I just thought that was beautiful. But, we got to be able to phrase that in a better way and communicate that.
Well, Michael, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Tell everyone, where can they get this one more time? Where you go?
You can find this new book on Amazon.com or on Wiley.com. And if you do it, I'd love it if you'd put a review on there or share your feedback with me via email. Hopefully there'll be a link on the podcast.
There should be one somewhere down there.
So we can continue the conversation.
Or depending on where I am in the blog, maybe up there. I don't know.
But I thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of
I've
fun.
enjoyed it, Michael.
Thank you so much.